In the heart of a forgotten town stood an ancient, dust-coated bookstore. Its windows were so caked with grime that passerbyers rarely noticed the faint glow of a single lantern inside. The crooked sign above the door read Briar and Thorn Books. Though the letters had fainted so much they were barely legible, few ventured through its wrapped wooden doors, and those who did rarely returned with a story worth sharing. Among the cluttered shelves of yellowed paperbacks and leather-bound tomes was a single book that no one dared touch. It sat in the darkest corner, bound in cracked black leather with no title or author on its spine. Whispers swirled about the book, that it was cursed, that its words changed for each reader, and that no one who finished it ever walked away the same. Emily, a restless grad student with a love for the obscure, stumbled upon the bookstore one rainy evening. She had been wandering aimlessly after a fight with her roommates, her umbrella flipped inside out by the howling wind. When she saw the faint light from the shop's door, she decided to step inside, more for shelter than curiosity. The store smelled of damp wood and decaying paper. The proprietor, an ancient man with watery gray eyes, sat behind the counter, reading a book of his own. He didn't look up as Emily entered. She hesitated, then began exploring the narrow aisles, her fingers tracing the spines of books that seemed older than the town itself. She found it in the farthest corner, tucked between volumes with titles in forgotten languages. The black leather book seemed to hum under her gaze. Her breath caught, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached for it. The book was colder than she expected, and a strange sensation crawled up her arm as she held it. It felt heavier than its size suggested, as though the words inside carried more than the weight in ink. Emily opened it. The first page was blank, so was the second, but on the third, ink began to seep up from the paper, forming words as if they had been waiting for her. Read and know yourself. A nervous chuckle escaped her lips, but curiosity rooted in place. She turned the page and the story began. At first, it seemed generic, a girl walking through a rainy town, seeking shelter. But as she read further, her blood ran cold. It was her story. Every secret, every lie she ever told, every moment she thought no one had ever noticed was written in perfect, horrifying detail. She flipped the pages faster, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The book described events that she had never shared with anyone. The day she stole money from her mother's purse, the time she lied to a friend and cost them their dream job, and then the story shifted. It began to show moments she hadn't lived yet, decisions she hadn't made, consequences she hadn't faced. Her fingers hesitated as she reached the final page, but the book didn't let her stop. The words began to write themselves before her eyes. The reader sits in the dim light of the bookstore, her fingers trembling, her breath hitching. She reads these fairy words and realizes she is no longer alone. Emily's breath hitched. She felt the unmistakable sensation of someone standing behind her. The lantern above flickered, casting shifting shadows on the shelves. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. No one came, but the feeling didn't fade. She slammed the book shut and spun around, her eyes darting through the dim aisles. No one was there. The shop was silent except for the faint creak of wood. She hurried back to the counter, desperate to return the book and leave, but the old man was gone. Only the faint imprint of his chair on the dust-covered floor suggested he had ever been there. The door swung open with a loud creak, though Emily hadn't touched it. She hesitated for only a second before bolting outside, the rain drenching her once more. She didn't look back. The next morning, the book sat back on its shelf, waiting for the next reader. This time, the cracked leather book bore a new title: Emily's Story.